Greetings, folks. Eler here. Today we're doing something a little different. We'll be having a conversation with a fellow World of Warships player to talk about their warships background and their interests, and explore some topics of the game that are important to them. Our guest today has had his replays featured on the channel a number of times, and he has kindly shared this idea of holding conversations, or he's kindled this idea of sharing conversations with our World of Warships colleagues. And then he has also graciously volunteered to be this channel's first guest. So with that, I'm honored to welcome Lynn Wilkie to the channel. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you for having me, Elar. It's a great honor to be featured on your channel so many times and to be the first interviewee.
Well, you are welcome. So let's first start with the background of your in-game name.
Well, Lynn is a main character in a piece of fiction that I've been working on for quite a number of years now, and Wilk is the family name of the household.
Wilke is a German name. Is this a German family in the story, or is it just happen to be have a Germanic background and they're located somewhere else in the world?
I definitely thought of the name from the German background aspect of it, and I thought it sounded fitting for the household.
Well, let's talk about your World of Warships experience, how you got introduced to the game, when you started playing, and if you want to talk about your gaming preferences and play styles and anything else that you think is important to you from an experience perspective.
All right. Well, I originally started playing the wargaming games with World of Tanks until I hit the tier 6 wall of fighting tier 8 heavy tanks every single game. So at the suggestion of a longtime friend of mine by the in-game name Zephyr421, I looked into World of Warships and was very intrigued by especially the prospect of sailing the Imperial Japanese Navy battleship Yamato and the Kriegsmarine battleship Bismarck.
So when you started playing, had the German battleships come out? This would have been August 2016.
Yes, the German battleship line was released by the time I started playing World of Warships.
And for our viewers, we probably should give a little bit of background on the replay that we're actually sharing in the background. So do you want to give some background on that as well?
Well, standard div makeup. I believe Shepker was in the destroyer. And since Jimmy Jazz brought his Wang He, I knew I would have limited issues with aircraft, so I decided to bring the Mutsu into the game. During the course of the match, especially towards the end, I will be making use of all of her armament in order to try to impact the game at the Bravo Cap.
So coming back to your preferred play style and classes and so forth, do you want to offer some background on what you like to play and why?
Okay, so to start off, I have currently a little over 8,600 battles in the game, with 65% of them in battleships. My playstyle has developed into a calculated, aggressive approach. I bide my time, and then when I have an opportunity, I push in extremely hard, which also is great for collecting my favorite stat, which is potential damage, which currently average a little over 1 million per game across all my ships in random.
So how would you characterize for you the differences between the playstyles for the Japanese battleships versus her other nations' contemporaries?
Imperial Japanese Navy battleships tend to excel most in the mid to long range engagement, while the Germans have a tendency to do better the closer they are to the enemy. United States Navy is also a very good mid to long range contender.
So then what was it about the Japanese line that sort of drew you to it? Was it just sort of the historical aspect and you learned to play that style, or is it the style that grew on you and that's the one you preferred, or it just kind of fell out that way?
Well, as I have mentioned previously, one of my driving forces was being able to play the the Yamato, and that was the first line I started to play when I first joined the game, the Kawachi being my first battleship in the game, and the Yamato eventually becoming my first tier 10 in the game. Well, I will say that, as I've mentioned already with the Yamato, it is my most played ship at 690 games, followed by the Bismarck, and then followed by the Gneisenau. I have since began playing destroyers and cruisers a lot more, with my most played destroyer being the Khabarovsk, which your viewers who have seen some of my replays would be very familiar with at this point, I believe. And my most played cruiser is the Hindenburg.
You mentioned the Khabarovsk. I think that was the topic that you wanted to touch on, and it's something that is quite important to you. So, do you want to share with us what it is about the Khabarovsk that is, aside from its play style, that is so important to you?
Well, now that you've brought that up, yes, I do have a somewhat controversial topic surrounding the Khabarovsk to go into, and that is the use of the IFHE captain skill. Without IFHE, the Khabarovsk main guns has a pin value of 21 millimeters, and with IFHE, the Khabarovsk has a value of 28 millimeters.
So, why for you? Why is that so important?
This is important because it extends your ability to engage cruisers in particular. It doesn't do much to help against battleships, but cruisers in particular, all tier 10 cruisers have, with the exception of the Minotaur, which is covered in 16 millimeter plating, which IFHE is not required to pin, all of the other tier 10 cruisers have either 25 millimeter or 27 millimeter fore and aft armor plating.
Is that inclusive of the Stalingrad as well, or?
That is also inclusive of the Stalingrad, with 25 millimeters of fore and aft plating.
I see.
So IFHE allows the Khabarovsk to pin not only the superstructures of all of these cruisers, which it was already able to do so, but gives you hitboxes at the fore and aft end, which opens up options, especially if they are bow on or sideways to you at range, to get additional damage.
Like you mentioned, without IFHE, the 130 millimeter rifles can penetrate up to 21 millimeters. That is certainly enough for all superstructures of all ships in the game, including battleships. Most platings of most destroyers, other than the Khabarovsk that has that 50 millimeter plate, but pretty much every other destroyer at tier 10, and even the other tier 8 and tier 9 that it can face, the destroyers are generally layered with 16 millimeters of plating. So it has no problems taking on opposing destroyers without IFHE. Have you done any research in terms of, beyond just sort of the raw numbers? Do you have a sense for any damage increases that you see on average with the IFHE or without it?
Well, when shooting at destroyers in particular, as you've mentioned, they're mostly covered in 16 millimeter plating. So not only does it not really improve the pin value against destroyers, I've not really noticed any crazy damage increase. Personally speaking, I just like the additional options when facing cruisers at range.
One of the objections from certain well-known contributors around the use of IFHE and the Khabarovsk is that the IFHE skill reduces the chance of fires, and fires are often seen as a key damage contributor from these upper tier, or frankly all of the Soviet gunboats. So the question really lies, are you losing so much in potential damage from fires than you're gaining from improved damage from penetrations?
I mean, the IFHE captain skill does decrease your fire chance. This is very true, but the cutoff for that is 139 millimeters, and with the Kaba at 130 millimeters, it only suffers by 1% decrease in fire chance. Currently, mine is sitting at 7%. I didn't verify if I had any flags on there currently, but I have found that volume of fire makes up for, plus the additional pin and damage makes up for any lack of fire chance. And from the fire chance standpoint, in fact, your burning ships to the waterline video, both I have IFHE in it, and I got over 120,000 in fire damage over the course of that game.
If you compare a Khabarovsk, so I'm talking without signals, so if you take a Khabarovsk that has IFHE but does not have Demolition Expert, the fire chance is 7%, but if you have a Khabarovsk that does not have IFHE but does have Demolition Expert, the fire chance is 10%. Had you run the Khabarovsk without IFHE for any prolonged period, and you anecdotally felt like you saw a substantial improvement after you took IFHE?
You definitely bring up a very good argument there on how without IFHE and with Demolition Expert, you would have a 10% fire chance with the Kava, and if you are doing the same volume of fire with and without IFHE, you will probably most certainly get more fires. That I will not dispute that in the slightest. That's simple math there. As far as the other question, I have never not had IFHE on my Kaba. I believe I picked up that captain skill during my time in the Kiev and never looked back.
All right, so we would certainly welcome our viewers if they have, I mean, there's obviously, this is a rather divisive matter, and if anybody in the viewing audiences has any sort of hard data based on their own experimentation, this is something that I've toyed with the idea, but I don't play the Khabarovsk enough to really get together enough good data on this. But if somebody has done this and says, okay, out of 10,000 shell hits with and without IFHE, here's the damage distribution, that would be a very solid way to assess the value of IFHE or not having it, either way. I do want to thank you, Lynn, for taking the time to participate and certainly kindling this idea, so thank you very much for that. I also do want to thank the audience for sticking with us through the interview. I'd like to hear from you as far as what you think about the format and the content, what you felt like worked well and what didn't work well and why. And please just leave your suggestions and ideas below. So again, thank you, Lynn, for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Elar.
Okay, very good. Thank you, and appreciate it. Again, everybody in the audience, we hope to see you out there, and we wish you happy sailing. Just a quick epilogue to the interview with Lynn, which originally lasted more than 1 hour. My intention here has been to offer content that fits within the time span of a single replay, so I'm looking at a separate video with a continuation of the interview with Lynn that talks about his favorite battleships by tier. I, again, do welcome feedback from the audience regarding the content, what they liked, what they suggest be changed or improved, or other topics they would like to see covered in interviews. I also encourage folks to stay on with this replay because this is a nail-biter right down to the very end. And with that, again, we certainly hope to see you out there, and we wish you happy sailing.